We took a tablecloth 2 years ago when we went to Michigan, or last summer when we went to Michigan, and worked on it as we traveled from one place to the other. You know, Michigan and Wisconsin and South Dakota and all North Dakota, all those different places. This time I was going to take one along, and I couldn't find any. I got that one in Florida, and I couldn't find any. We finally found one, and we took it along. We did, and he finished it this summer. But you can't find embroidered things other than pillowcases.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of them around.
But that's about all.
I guess people just don't want to invest the time in those things.
They have too many other kind of hobbies here. But now, in other states you find them. Even Oregon had a beautiful collection of everything. Montana and all those places that had everything you wanted. And we did find a new blanket, the baby blanket. He hasn't started yet, but we found
This
it.
is so nice. Oh, let's hold it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Babies are coming up
I'm gonna
fast.
put- I'll move it over here. Ray and Helen made this for baby Dave. Helen made the blanket, and Ray did the embroidery. Is that right?
Well, give us a date, Mom, while you're there.
This is October 21st, 1987, and we've
Just
been blessed by Ray and Helen Kuhlow coming over.
Just finished a lovely dinner.
That's right.
The whole Jordan
Thank you.
family in attendance.
You know, that's become more of a rarity. As you remember when your kids were
Absolutely.
these ages.
And we topped it all off with a luscious chocolate sundae.
Almost. Pretty good stuff.
Scott and I finished the potatoes and gravy and peas.
To get something for Nancy is so hard, usually for the holidays. So we decided that as long as she's going to turn 20 and she does date, that we would do her a tablecloth for Christmas this year. And we made it a white tablecloth with all the royal blue stitching on it. So Ray did every bit of it. And then we did the royal blue napkins to go along with it, and I want to get her the napkin holder so that it should be a nice gift for something for her to keep for her future.
Oh, she'll treasure that.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
good.
And then I'm doing crocheting her some doilies.
Oh,
Neat.
So
start her a hope chest.
yeah, I don't know if they do that anymore, but
I don't know why not.
Sounds good to me.
Don't ask us about what girls do.
Well, it's so hard to get her anything because she has her own particular likes and dislikes, and we don't see her. And to give her money all the time, it gets to be a bore. So we can still give her some money, but
those are things that she'll treasure. And
right.
No, that's neat.
So that's
well,
what
how about running us back through things that Dean and I have been aware of, but the kids may not know it. It seems to me that you guys grew up in the same church, and where you met,
we were
that kind of
confirmed
thing.
to the same church.
And that was in Michigan?
Sawyer, Michigan.
Sawyer, Michigan.
Sawyer, Michigan. Sawyer. Back in the 1930s.
I recall you talking about your father was a farmer, and he essentially just the hard work just drove you away, drove you into the military.
Well, you see, the thing that was taking place in those years, my father, as a youngster, came from Germany when he was 8 years old. And Helen's folks, her father came from Germany. Her mother was born in the Michigan area, but her father came from Michigan, or from Germany, when they were youngsters.
About what time was that?
This was in the early 1900s. And after they got off of the ship on the East Coast, wherever they landed, whether it be Boston or New York or whatever, they had knowledge of some German friends and relatives having migrated west to Michigan and took up homesteading in the Michigan area as farmers, because this was the sort of thing they were involved with in Germany. They were primarily were from farming communities in Germany.
Would that have been about the same kind of climate as in Germany
Yeah,
too?
yeah, pretty much the same.
Yeah.
So they settled in a couple of these small communities around there in Michigan, and they were primarily German communities. In fact, the road the dirt road that Helen's folks lived on was known as the Dutch Road.
Hmm.
And an awful lot of those people on that Dutch road were related.
Yeah,
Cousins,
sure.
nephews, brothers, sisters.
Oh, really?
And it was the same way in the area where I lived. There were an awful lot of relatives that lived in the area. You know, we think of Westlake Village here, and you look at your community and you find everybody came from someplace, and you sort of got acquainted with them here. But in this case, these people came from Germany. Most of them came from Germany. I imagine 80% of the people that lived in those communities came from Germany. And they were sure-tailed relatives of one another of some fashion.
Was German
Yeah.
spoken in both your homes
Uh,
sometimes, or? I guess so
If
your mothers
Daddy-
didn't speak German, is that right?
oh, yes, she did.
Mhm.
If Daddy wanted to say something to my mother that, and not think that we wouldn't understand, then he said he spoke German. When he came here, he said, "This is my country and this is what we'll speak." So he always spoke English to us. However, my mother's mother, my grandmother, aunt, wouldn't speak anything but German to us. So she always spoke German to us, but we answered her in English.
That's interesting.
So we did know what was spoken,
Yeah.
but Daddy never would speak German to us,
Hmm.
which I admire him for now,
That's a
because
good
I
decision.
think if the Spanish people that came here would had the same kind of an idea, we would be a lot better off this day, because I don't think we have to give up our language for these people that are coming in, that they should accept the language of the country where they are living.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
that's what
Yeah, I
Daddy
agree.
did, and there were a lot of them that didn't, but that proves Daddy's power.
So would you were bilingual then?
I
You
didn't
were-
speak I could, well, I could in school too, but I knew everything that was being said. I could write it, but for the most part, I didn't speak German.
Did they have German church services in your
yes,
church?
it was all German, even confirmation class. 2 years, no, just before 3 years. Just before my sister, who was a year and a half older than I, was to be confirmed, they changed it and they put English, so you could either take German or English, be confirmed in English or German.
Hmm.
But up until that time, it was all German.
Hmm.
It was definitely a German community,
Wow.
German Lutheran church.
Now, then you met in your confirmation class, or you met in church and you went to
In
the same?
He came over to the Lutheran school in 7th grade. We had Lutheran school.
Mm.
And he went there 7th and 8th grade, 2 years he had to take confirmation. But I started 3rd grade, I think I went over there, or 4th grade, see there again, my parents didn't want to put me into the German parochial school because they were still speaking German. But then when they switched over, then 4th grade I went over to the school, and he went over for the 7th grade. So that was the difference.
So then you both were confirmed, and did you start dating then, or later on, or
Well,
We couldn't afford to date.
did you go to ice cream social at church?
No cars and no money. We associated a little bit with church functions and
Walter League.
youth groups, the
Yeah.
Walter League. But then shortly after that, as Dean mentioned, asked a question about how hard things were and why I left home early and joined the Navy. I guess we could back up a little further and pick up where these Germans came to this community. And what they found there was not developed homes with electricity and running water and fertile soil waiting for them to scatter seed. What they found was brush and trees and swamps. So their their immediate needs was survival, wasn't it? They needed food stuff, they needed a shelter, and so many of them built mud and grass and thatched homes and with a little bit of wood in them. Some of the logs they cut themselves out of the woods where they were clearing the ground so that they could till it and grow crops on it. So the first thing they had to do was to clear the ground. It wasn't laying there for them, ready to put seed in. And the ground was not level. They did not have earth-moving equipment such as they had today. One of the highest priorities that the immigrant had when he came to Michigan there was, first of all, he needed a cow, didn't he? He needed milk and butter. He needed a few chickens. He needed a hog. And he needed a team of horses. And he needed a good, strong woman to help him on that farm. Not a good-looking woman, a good, strong woman. Muscles, a good, strong back. Because they had to go out and they had to grub their way into the world. And this sort of thing didn't come overnight. Every year the farmer would attempt to clear a little more soil so that the following year he could put another quarter of an acre. If he could put another quarter of an acre under cultivation, he had accomplished something. And
Were you clearing forest, or were you just...
it was flat land, but it was a lot of brush. There weren't many large trees there, but there was a lot of brush.
We had woods on our land.
Woods, you had woods, not trees like you saw in the sequoias up here, but you know.
trees? You had to cut down
10,
trees?
12, yeah.
You had to pull the
Pull the
stumps? Boulders, I know you had rock.
Yeah, and then the land was uneven, so there was a thing that went on there, and if the land was uneven, the water would always tend to run towards the low spots, wouldn't it? So that was not very conducive to good farming, to have low spots in all these fields where nothing would grow. So they put in tile. You ever hear of tile or ever see tile put in the soil? They would go out and they would dig a trench about 2 feet deep, and they would put these round 4-inch clay tile in these low spots, and this tile would drain this water off then to a ditch. They would run it to a ditch, and the ditch would run it to a river. And there was a lot of back-breaking man-hours. That was all dug by shovel. You know, there were no backhoes. It was all dug by shovel, by hand.
And kids started in the fields early, didn't
We
they?
did, yeah.
Would you believe that by the time I was 5, I had to babysit my younger brother and sister, 5 years old.
Pretty young.
My sister, who was a year and a half older than I, was already picking berries by the time she was 6 and a half. You could pick berries the major part of the day. You went home for lunch. When I think of it now, who would allow a child nowadays to take care of children but when they're 5 years old? A baby.
Mm-hmm. Boy.
Or who would demand a youngster, 6 and a half, 7 years old, to
pick
put 8 to
berries.
10 hours a day in the field?
Yeah.
Working like
Working.
a man.
Yeah.
But
That was very necessary. And it was interesting as I think about it now. We had country schools. We had all 8 grades in one room, and we had a good school teacher. He also had a leather strap about that wide and about this long that hung on his desk, and he had permission to use it, and he used it with authority. And we also had a school board. As early as those days, somebody determined it was necessary to have a school board. I don't know really what they did, other than one thing. I remember they did one thing. The farmers would always get together 2 or 3 weeks before the local elections. And they'd say, now we want to vote for Dean, and we want to vote for Joe, and we want to vote for Jim, because they're all farmers. The farmers would want to keep the upper hand on the school board.
So they'd get the kids out when crops came in?
They
Was that
controlled
it?
the school session, that's right. That's right. School didn't start until after the crops were all off, And school was out by the 15th of May, because by the 15th of May, frost was out of the ground.
You had to plant.
And we had to start plowing and planting and being out in the field, so the kids had to be out of school.
However, we didn't get the vacations like they did.
No,
We didn't
oh,
have
no
time
vacations.
off like they have now.
Once school started,
You still got your days, as many days as you had to have for schooling,
Mhm.
but you didn't get all the vacation,
Yeah.
so.
So you didn't like that kind of life, huh?
oh, no.
Well, it was hard because we had fruit, mainly fruit and vegetables. And fruit was started in June and it went all the way till through, well, apples, all kinds of apples and pears. So it was through till October. You had work from May till October. There was
And dawn
something
till
to
dusk, I
pick
assume.
all the time.
Yeah.
Saturday, we didn't have to pick, because there wasn't any market on Saturday. But we washed and ironed and baked bread and canned and whatever else had to be done on Saturday. Because Sunday, we had to pick berries if it was berries, like strawberries or raspberries, that wouldn't stay on, they had to be picked. So it was 7 days a week. During the summer, if fruit was on, we couldn't go to church because you had to get the berries off. So, and it was, Dad used to take it to an open air market in St. Joseph and Harbor area. And they were only open till a certain time, so we had to pick early so that he could leave maybe 2:30 to go to this market to get his berries to the market. So,
Don't get any money.
that's right. And the berries don't stay. When they're ripe, they have to be picked or they fall off.
Did you bring that with you? Did you bring apples and pears and berries with you and plant them, or did you find them when they arrived? What kind
Well,
of,
that's a little bit before my time.
don't know.
I suppose that they probably developed these from the wild stuff that was growing there.
Well, there was still,
I don't imagine they brought any of those fruit trees and stuff on the ship with them across. I imagine they found them all. Well, of course, the Indians were there ahead of them.
yeah, but honey, that
The
was
Indians.
already, when they came, there was already people living in the
Yeah,
area.
there were people around.
There was a lot of people living there, and they would have so many acres, and then they could get it from the other people that were already there.
so you were pioneering on your land, but there was a city within
Oh,
striking
sure.
distance.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, it was a city, a little town,
Yeah,
a
there was
little
still.
town 3 miles away.
Well, obviously there had to be a market, you just referred to it,
Yeah.
so there was a...
Uh-huh. No, there were towns all over, but they're,
Wherever these settlements put their roots, there was need for a general store, gas station, a market, and what would you call it, a plant for fertilizer and grain and things like that. There had to be a mill, because these farmers raised their own grain, and then they took the grains in and had them ground for flour and for chicken and hog feed and cattle feed and that sort of thing. The necessities were dictated by what was going on around out in the farmlands, you know.
see, even when my grandparents came over, which was Grandma and Grandpa Aunt, they came to Stevensville, Michigan, which is across the lake from Chicago. And he was working for a Burgermeister in Germany, which is a mayor. And they didn't even have wood floors. They had dirt floors over in Germany and then when they came here, my grandpa was more or less a jack of all trades. He could do everything. He had, they had 3 children over there. 2 of them died, and I guess the 3rd one died over here. But then they still had 9 here.
Wow.
7 boys and 2 girls, my mother and my aunt. And my aunt's the only one that's left out of the whole family of children. And they they worked for somebody first, and then they finally acquired land and did their own farm. But it was already a town there, and whatever they needed. But he could do almost anything. He was a carpenter and could do, he loved fishing, and got a lot of their food through, their meat through fish that he caught.
Mhm.
And he was, well, just a jack of all trades. Well, he had to be,
Sure.
because they didn't have the opportunity like you have now. You can just run in and get what you want. But it was already a town when he came, and that's where my mother was born.
And you have how many brothers and sisters? How many?
I do. Well, there were 5. There were 10 of us. 5 that are half brothers and sisters, and 5 of us that are right brothers and sisters. And my oldest, the sister that's Care, that lives in Michigan, that came out to see us so many winters. She's the oldest of my mother and father. And then I am, and then my brother Ray, and then there's Norman, and there's Elaine. Elaine lives in Florida now.
And Ray, you have how many? You had a smaller family, wasn't it?
I had 2 brothers and a sister.
In what order? You're first, third?
I was the oldest.
You're the oldest?
Was that a shock for your parents when you said, I don't want any of this, or?
No, it became quite apparent to me by the time I got in high school that this wasn't the life for me. As I looked around in the community, in fact, one summer in early fall, I worked. Went out to work for 10 cents an hour.
And a grape vineyard.
On a grape vineyard. The only thing that was around there was farm work. There was no industry. And I worked on a vineyard that my granddad was the foreman on. And he allowed me to get in a 10-hour day so that I could make $1 a day. And he allowed me to work 6 days a week. He allowed me to work on Saturday so that I could make $6 a week.
All that.
And the $4 of that I gave to my mother
Can you imagine?
for room and board. And I kept the whole $2 to myself every week. And after a few months of that, I just knew there had to be something different somewhere else. This wasn't for me. And I told my dad out in the field one day, I said, this is not for me, I've got to get out of here.
Oh, he had an uncle in the Navy already. His uncle was in the Navy.
One down here in San Diego.
Oh, yes.
That's right,
What was
that's
that,
right.
Frank?
Yeah, you met him at the 1968, at the anniversary.
That's right.
And
And I think other times than that, too. We've met him a couple times.
so I figured that was the thing for me to try, was to get away from Michigan. I had to go someplace where there was water, to get far enough away. And so I wanted to try the Navy. And
Was this
they sort of agreed that maybe that would be all right.
Was that a problem with you? That's what I was going to ask you. This wasn't a conflict between you and your dad, was it? This was, you just said, Dad, I'm going to try something else.
Yeah, and it was kind of agreed that I was going to leave after school was out the following spring. I had an uncle that was going to go in the Navy with me at the same time. And my mother kind of felt as long as I was going to be going in the Navy with Uncle Walt, it would probably be all right. Her little 17-and-a-half-year-old baby leaving home. But so we signed up at the recruiting station in the early fall with the assumption that we were going to go in the Navy the following May, 15th of May, something like that.
So you would have been out of high school?
Yeah.
If that is-
And we would have gone in together, my uncle and I. So then all of a sudden, along about the 1st of November, here comes a letter in the mail from this recruiting office, and stating, we have an opening for 2, and if the 2 of you want to go in together, you have to go in November. And when my mother opened that and looked at that, boy, she hit the ceiling. She said, you told me you weren't going to go till next May. And I said, well, we didn't have anything to do with this. This just happened this way, And so it was generally agreed that, well, as long as Uncle Walt was going along, he was about 8 or 9 years older than me. I figured, well, that'll be okay.
What was he doing before that?
He was farming.
Oh, and he had enough of farming, it just
Yeah.
took him longer to find
Yeah.
out. Huh?
Everybody farmed just about, or else worked on a railroad.
So that was November
That was November of 1939.
39.
So off we went to Detroit, to the recruiting office, to be signed up and sworn in and so forth. In the process of being interviewed there, and the full procedure of going through the induction, he got separated and was in one room and I was in another room. And so I went all through and raised my right hand and sworn in and signed right here. And they said, okay, go out and go in the room across the hall and wait until we get through here. So I go out and I start through the hall and I look in this other room and my Uncle Walt's sitting in there with about three or four other fellows. And he says to me, did you make it? And I said, yes. And he says, I didn't. It turned out that he had a couple of too many teeth out, you know, his molars or grinders or something. The Navy was pretty strict in those days, taking people in, he had too many teeth out. So I told him, I said, well, whatever you do, don't tell my mother. I don't know how long I figured he was going to be able to stay away from my mother in that little farming community back there. So I went on to Great Lakes in Chicago to training, and he went back home, and he did Dodger for 4 or 5 days, I guess. And finally one day, I got called into the chaplain's office. And the chaplain said, son, what's the matter with you? Don't you like it here? And I said, oh, yes, sir. I like the Navy fine. He says, well, I have a feeling that that's not the case. I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, well, why did you write your mother, and what did you write your mother and tell her? And I said, well, nothing really. He said, well, we have a letter here from your mother for you to read. And I read this letter, and she says, we're going to come over next weekend and get you.
Take you back from the Navy?
You don't like it. We're going to come over Saturday and pick you up and take you back, bring you back home. Well, then it kind of dawned on me, you know, apparently she must have found out that Uncle Walt wasn't over there with me. So I told the chaplain what the situation was, and he says, well, he said, here's a piece of paper and a pencil. You sit right down now and write your mother a letter, and I'm going to mail it to her. So I had to write a letter right there in front of him, you know, telling her that I liked the Navy and everything was fine. Just forget about me, Mom. In a few weeks I'll finish training, I'll be home, you know, and all that sort of thing. And then he said, okay, sign that. He folded it up, or stamped on it and mailed it, you know. My mother was going to come right over there and get me out.
She must have been a tough gal.
Yeah.
Please excuse me, I've got homework to do.
Okay, great. Nice having dinner with you tonight.
Thank you. I'll see you guys.
Okay.
So, what were you thinking all this time? I mean, were you thinking about maybe I'll never see him again, or had you guys made some tentative plans or anything?
We have never gotten that far along. I liked her. I thought I liked her. We went to different high schools together.
Together.
Together apart.
She lived over this way 3 miles, I lived over this way 3 miles, so it was more convenient for her to go to the high school over that way, and I went this direction.
Oh.
So we went to rival high schools, and kind of drifted apart that way a little bit. And then immediately I headed out and came out to the west coast here.
Well, now at that time, the war in Europe was going.
Hadn't started yet in 39.
In 39?
The war in Europe had it, but we hadn't gotten involved.
But had it occurred to you that you might be signing up for some wartime duty?
Not really.
Right, but you were aware that the war was going on.
We were sort of an isolationist country at that time.
Mm-hmm.
The Congress and the people didn't want us to get involved in another war in Europe. You know, we had been through World War I, and they weren't much in favor of us going over and helping Great Britain and France and those countries out.
Well, wasn't that one of Franklin Roosevelt's part of his platform, or keeping your boys out of the war?
Yeah.
And people really believed it at the time that we wouldn't be touched.
And we
by
had
each
given
other.
Great Britain a number of our old destroyers. We said we were doing our part by giving them some of our old destroyers to help fight the German U-boats and things like that. But then there was a chain of events that began to come about that the mood of the country and the Congress began to change. first thing that began to happen was Hitler wasn't satisfied with just Poland and Austria and some of those countries. The next thing you know, why, he began to move into France, and then he began to bomb Great Britain. And it became quite apparent that if the tide had not been turned in some way, why, he was going to gobble up all of Europe. And were we next, you know, or something like that. His U-boats were beginning to run pretty roughshod. We were shipping a lot of war materials and supplies to Great Britain and France, and Hitler's U-boats were sinking a lot of our ships, our merchant ships, going over. And then we began to run convoys with American destroyers as escorts. We would bunch up 6 or 8 of these supply ships and send 3 or 4 destroyers along with them across the Atlantic. And the U-boat captains, you know, they were having a field day. It was ducks on a pond out there in the Atlantic. And the German U-boat captains were having things pretty much their own way, and they began to fire torpedoes at everything that was on the water, you know. And the next thing you know, the first American destroyer that was hit and sunk was the Reuben James. I don't know if you ever remember that name or not.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Heard the song.
yeah, that was the first destroyer that, U.S. destroyer that was sunk in the North Atlantic. And that pretty much shook up the Congress and the American people. And then we began to move some of our Navy from the Pacific over into the Atlantic. And it was about that time that they decided to move the fleet from home port of Long Beach, San Pedro, out to Pearl Harbor.
So at this time, you had been, when you got out of your basic training, you were sent right to San Diego?
No, I went to Long Beach.
To Long Beach.
And caught the battleship California.
Oh, that was your first assignment.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we operated along the west coast. I went aboard the California, I think it was in March of 1940. And it was about August of 1940 when we transferred most of the fleet out to Pearl Harbor. And sent a few of the ships, I don't know, I guess we sent around 20 ships around to the East Coast to beef up our appearance in the Atlantic and over around the Mediterranean, around the British Isles, to give some assistance to the British.
Were people aware of Pearl Harbor and Hawaii to any degree, or if you rode home to Helen and said, I'm going to Pearl Harbor, where she just said,
No.
what's that?
I think they probably knew Hawaii, but they probably didn't know much about Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when they first spread the word on the ship, the fleet's going to move to Pearl Harbor, we said, where's Pearl Harbor? You know, what's Pearl Harbor? Harbor meant something, but Pearl didn't.
Yeah, what's that mean?
And they said, well, it's out in the Hawaiian Islands, 2,700 miles west of here. And, I guess the question we had, well, what sort of a naval installation do we have out there? You know, it takes something to support a fleet if you're going to move that size of fleet out there. And you've got to have berthing facilities, you've got to have fuel oil, and you've got to have a supply base.
Repair.
You've got to have repair facilities, you've got to have a deep harbor. These battleships and aircraft carriers, they drew 54 foot of water. So you had to have a pretty good size naval base of some sort, or prospects of a naval base.
Mm-hmm.
And
So you had about 20 ships that were going to Pearl and 20 that were going East Coast?
no, I think we had about 40 or 50 that were going out to Pearl Harbor, and around 20 that were transferred around to the East Coast.
And that was all the Pacific Fleet?
Pretty much all of it, yeah.
That was it?
The people in Long Beach and San Diego and San Francisco, they were really screaming. Why? They were losing their support base,
You bet,
their
revenue.
tax dollar revenue and the tax dollars. And what are we going to do with the fleet going to Hawaii?
Then they moved families and everybody, is that right?
No.
Few people.
In those days, there weren't many sailors that were married.
Hmm.
In fact, it was a Navy regulation that you could not get married until you were second-class petty officer. And then you had to write a letter to your commanding officer requesting permission to get married. So all of your lower pay grades were not married, and not many of the upper pay grades were married. It was, you know, you were getting by on a pretty small monthly pay.
More than $6 for a week?
When I first went to the Navy, I made $21 a month. But everything was furnished. That was better than 10 cents an hour back in Michigan.
Especially when you had to give $4 to your
Yeah.
mother.
I was getting $21 a month, and my room and board was all furnished, and my travel, and all my laundry, and that sort of thing, you know, and
Your uniforms,
my apartment.
clothing?
There might have been 68 of us living in that apartment, but it was all furnished. So it was pretty attractive.
Were you assigned to your, I'm trying to think of what you called your duty, I think of these being like, make everything safe, but that wasn't what you were doing at the time, was it? You were...
Well, we
loading
were
shells or
training.
something?
You were in a constant state of training for readiness. I went into the gunnery department. There are, aboard a ship, there are several departments to make a ship function, just like it would take several departments to make a city function. The gunnery department, their primary purpose is to maintain the armament on the ship, to train on how to use it, and to keep it in a high state of readiness, and the crews in a high state of expertise in working that armament. You have an engineering department, which is their responsibility is to move the ship through the water, to make fresh water for the ship, to make ice for the ship, to make air to send to the various workshops to make equipment work, and to make electricity. We're a long ways away from a substation on land, and we can't run electric wires out there. So the engineering department is a pretty unique department in itself to make a ship that size with 12 to 1,600 men on board, livable 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, while you're out bouncing around in the ocean. You have a navigation department whose primary purpose is to maintain the equipment that assists them in navigating the ship and finding its way around in the oceans out there. There's no Texaco road maps to follow. And you have what's called an operations department. Their primary function is to work the equipment that finds out where the ship is, where it's going, how it's going to get there. They track aircraft. In time of war, their primary function is to know where the enemy is, what he's doing, and what we're going to do if he comes our way. We have a repair department whose personnel are selected from the resources available when they come into the Navy. You know, maybe the guy was a sheet metal worker, or maybe he was a welder. They find those type of people, they go in the repair department, and it's their job to keep all of the various parts of the ship repaired as damage occurs from storms or just wear and tear on equipment, things like that. You have one very important group of men on the ship whose responsibilities are to feed a 1,200-man crew 3 meals a day. That's quite a breakfast. You know, you have quite a time getting breakfast for, what do you have, 6 here in the house?
7.
6.5. And can you imagine what it'd be like to be the one person who heads up the department that's got to decide how they're going to feed breakfast to 1,200 men tomorrow morning starting at 6 o'clock and get them all fed by 6:45.
Did you have a specific time when you had to be there at mess and you had to be done?
Yep.
And I suppose you had to eat pretty quickly.
Yep. You sure did. You had 2 hands. God gave you 2 hands. And you better
Use them both.
Yeah, you you had that galley crew, you had potato peelers, you had vegetable preparers, you had bakers, you had cooks, and you had what they call the mess detail. These were the fellows that set up all the mess tables, set up all the trays and silverware and things like this, and the scullery crew. And it all worked like a piece of machinery, you know, well honed and well geared, and it just worked like clockwork. And at about 20 minutes to 6 in the morning, the bugler would blow chow down, and everybody went to their table. And here came the food down from the galley, and these mess cooks came down those ladders, boy, one right behind the other, and went to their various areas of the mess deck to feed these 1,200 people. And as soon as that food hit the table, it started at the end of the table where the most senior petty officer sat. So he got the stuff off the top.
You got the prime.
And the guy finally worked down to the end where Ray Kuhlow sat. And there was a little bit left in there. So it behooved you to see if you couldn't advance your position on the table a little bit, not just from the standpoint of dollars and cents in your pocket, but also the food. And another thing, for the dinner meal and the evening meal, each table had a mess captain. He was the most senior person at that table, and he went in a little ahead of time. And when the primary pieces of food came down, the main course, you know, the meat and things like that came down, he took the tureen and the spoon and he selected the best piece of meat and put it on his plate, and the next one over here and stuff like this. When it got down to the end, we tipped the tureen over and you scraped, you scraped what was left over down there on Ray's tray. And of course you usually help yourself to potatoes and gravy and bread. That's where I learned the Navy dessert. You know what the Navy dessert is?
No.
Gravy and bread.
Gravy and bread.
Gravy and bread. There always was plenty of bread and there was plenty of gravy. Sometimes there may not have been any potatoes by the time I got down there. But there was always plenty of gravy and bread. And that was one thing I loved. I always loved gravy and bread at home. And today,
So I guess you were kind of happy when somebody wasn't able to make it to the table, you get a little bit more on
a
your
little
plate.
more gravy.
Did you choose your selection of duty, or did they just assign you
No,
to?
not really. When I went in, I wanted to go into the engineering department and I wanted to become an electrician. I, for some reason or other, had felt that the career I wanted to make, and I had planned already when I first went in the Navy that I was going to make it a career. I was going to stay 20 years, I was going to get some education, and I wanted to become an electrician, but you had to wait for a position to come open. And in that period of waiting, of course, everyone had to serve on deck. I don't know, I think it was an unwritten rule, you had to serve on deck about 6 months.
What does that mean?
That means you had to scrub decks, you had to paint ship, you had to holy stone those wooden decks, you had to shine bright work. It meant you had to get up 5:30 in the morning and get started topside, you know, scrub all the salt off and scrub those decks down and polish the ship. And you did that every morning before breakfast. You worked an hour topside on that sort of thing every morning. And you had to go through that sort of a detail before you were given some sort of selection of your choice of what you wanted to get into. And then it was at the convenience of the government. But it really wasn't. It was at the convenience of the guy you worked for, you know. They told you it was the convenience of the government. And then one day, I was the kind of a kid, you know, that went along with things. I was more of a conformist, you might say. I accepted Navy life. I was happy to do what they wanted me to do, and I think I always accepted the challenge and did a fairly good job. So one of the chiefs in the turret, this gunnery turret, had seen what was going on, and one day he asked me, he said, "Kuhlow, how would you like to be a gunner's mate? Come in the turret and become a gunner's mate?" And boy, that was, you know, that was like moving from down in the slums up to Park Avenue.
Closer up to the beginning of the table?
Yeah, closer up the table. And mainly it got away from that 5 o'clock reveille and working on deck and everything like that for that hour in the morning.
So that 6 months, there was just a gang of you that
Yeah.
were the youngest and the lowest, and you had to,
And the knuckleheads.
okay.
Knucklehead.
There's some knuckleheads stayed out there 6 years. You know, they never got out of there.
Is that right?
Yeah,
That didn't bother them?
they just didn't care. They were along for the ride, you know. They got their payday, they got a free ride, they got free meals. There was always that, and well, we have them in society today.
Yeah.
So that led me into the 14-inch gun turrets and into the gunnery department, which was interesting to me because I had gotten into machinery and things like that. On the farm, I didn't have much of that. I had the old donkey work, you know, on the farm. A lot of hard work.
Yeah, but before the war actually started, your promotions were very hard to get, and openings didn't become available very often, so that you could stay in one slot for a long
Yeah,
time.
you could stay there for 4 years.
Because there just
In peacetime.
wasn't, see, and there just weren't openings. You could pass all the tests, but it didn't mean a thing.
So was a gunner's mate, I mean, that would give you an automatic rank change?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was a seaman up to that point. And at that time, in peacetime, all of the rates were very competitive, and they were what was called fleet-wide competition. I was in the battle fleet. Being on a battleship, I was in the battle fleet. And if there was a need somewhere for 2 or 3 third-class gunner's mates, why, the word would go out to the senior educational officer in the fleet, and he would notify the ships, okay, on the 31st of November, you can conduct an examination for third-class gunner's mate. We need to rate 3 third-class gunner's mates in the battle fleet. That's 14 battleships. Gonna rate 3 in 14 battleships. And each battleship probably had 60 fellows that wanted to take the exam. So they used multiples for selecting the ones that fill those 3 slots. The written examination, what they call the practical examination, the number of years in service, and a review of your service record to see how many times you've been captain's mast or over leave or something like that, you know. So they use that to work up a multiple, and from that you fell into the category of whether you were rated or you were not rated. And I was pretty fortunate. I had this uncle of mine on the ship, and this chief in the turret had taken a liking to me.
So Frank was on the California?
Yeah.
That was okay with the Navy? I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't mind relatives.
Not
I guess
then.
No,
That was
then.
after World War II, wasn't when those
Yeah.
wars?
Or during World War II.
Oh.
But see,
So,
what was it, first class or second class? What was he when the war broke out? First class.
He was first class boatswain,
Yeah.
and he'd been in 12 years.
See, and he couldn't ever put in for chief to make chief because it just wasn't any opening.
Now, were you allowed to communicate with him and so
Oh,
forth?
sure.
Just
Mm-hmm.
openly,
Yeah.
or wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
But see, he couldn't get over that Ray had danced so fast, and he'd been in so long, and it was because of the war that he advanced.
Now with that rate, were you a petty officer? Third?
I made third class petty officer the 1st of December, 1941. I took the examination in September, fleet-wide, competitive. And I don't know how many third class gunner's mates they needed in the fleet, in the battle fleet at that time. But I was one of many that took the exam in September, and I was rated the 1st of December. And then the Japanese attack came about the 7th of December.
It was 3 celebration, didn't they?
Yeah.
So, but you were doing this competition when the competition was still so keen, because we still had our peacetime Navy, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
So you got, say your rate again was what?
Third class gunner's mate,
On December?
7th, 1941.
December 1st?
December 1st,
So you had 6 days
6
before they
days.
dropped your boat out from under you.
no ship.
Ship.
Not my boat. Not my boat, my sheep.
So you just got the good news. I assume that kind of news would be
I
well
found,
received by
I found
everybody.
out about it, I didn't find out about it on the 1st of December. I found out about it just a day or two before December the 7th. It was effective the 1st of December. It took a little while for the paperwork, you know, to go between ships and through the ship's office and paperwork to be typed up and things like this, and then call down to the ship's office and sign your name and have the certificate put in your records and so forth that you were officially third-class gunner's mate. Everything was effective the 1st of December, including the pay. You know, I got an $8 a month raise.
Oh, boy.
That is significant,
Yeah,
going from
that's a lot,
21 to
yeah.
29.
Now, were you writing,
And I
Helen,
moved
was he
further
writing
up.
to you during this period of time? Was he a
I was
good,
at college,
he a good letter writer?
Oh, you were in college.
Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Oh,
Oh,
goodness
right.
You know
sake.
where that is?
Yeah, well, I heard of it for sure.
The song that was popular at that time was, I've Got a Gal at
Kalamazoo.
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 That
Right.
was me. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting thing about her, when she graduated from high school that June of 1940, she sent me, 1941, she sent me a nice picture, a graduation picture from high school. And I had a friend on the ship that did a little bit of tinting on the pictures. And he said, well, he said, that's a nice picture of her. But he said, the guy didn't really do a good job of developing. So he says, tell me a little bit about her. And he said, I'll tint it up a little bit for you. So he fixed up her hair a little
All
bit.
black and white at that time.
Was it?
Yeah.
So he fixed up the hair a little bit, and he asked me about her eyes, and I said she had blue eyes.
Ray Kuhlow, I know she doesn't have blue eyes.
I like her blue eyes. So he gave her blue eyes and things like that, you know.
Well, how do you look with blue eyes, Helen?
She doesn't know, but
Yeah, I got the picture.
you still have it?
I think so. I think so.
I thought maybe I lost it in my locker when I got all that.
But it took a dive, huh?
Yeah.
So during this time then, when you were in Pearl then from 1940, did you say, until 1941? What kind of things did your ship do? I mean, you just went around the Pacific for a couple of months, or?
They formed what we called a Blue Fleet and a White Fleet when we went out there. Because to start with, Honolulu was not a large enough town to suddenly absorb that influx of sailors that suddenly came out there on all these ships, you know. And these guys would want to go ashore and do things, you know, they didn't want to sit on the ship all the time. So Honolulu was just not a town like Chicago or Los Angeles. It was a little burg, so to say. So and then too, there was training that had to go on. You're constantly training. So they formed what they called a Blue Fleet and a White Fleet. When the Blue Fleet was at sea, the White Fleet was in port, and vice versa. And so we would go to sea for 2.5 weeks. Then the day before we went in port, the White Fleet would come out to sea, and the next morning the Blue Fleet would go in port. And then we would have relaxation, we'd do repairs, we'd replenish, take on provisions, things like that. We did community things. One of the things that I got involved with one time is the pineapple growers. At harvest time needed help, didn't they? There weren't a lot of people out there. There were no Mexicans coming across the border to help harvest their crops. A few Chinese. But when it came heavy harvest time for pineapples, they contacted the military and said, how about giving us 150 sailors for 2 weeks to help us harvest the pineapples? So I volunteered one time, and we went over to the island of Maui. And they had tents pitched up over there, you know, the Army pitched tents, and they hauled us out there in trucks. And they didn't have the fancy conveyor type harvesting equipment that we see out there now. We carried the stuff in a bag over our shoulder to some location and dumped them in boxes, and they hauled the boxes away. So we went out and helped the pineapple people harvest their pineapples for a couple weeks out.
I've never heard you say that.
I hadn't
before.
either.
Yeah.
This is the same fellow who wanted to get away from fruit and
Yeah.
I wanted to
Pineapple.
make sure it was the same
Pineapple
person.
sounded eating. And we got all the pineapple we wanted to eat, and,
Well, they paid you too, though, didn't they?
no.
They didn't pay
couldn't
you?
pay you anything, no, this was all
Slave
volunteer.
labor, huh?
One thing they did do, when we went back to the ship, they did send 5 or 6 big skip box loads of pineapple aboard one Saturday evening. And we had a movie, and we had some boxing matches and a smoker and things like that. And then afterwards, the cooks had big tables and set up on the fantail and their great big knives, you know, and we chopped those pineapples open, and we all sat back there on the pineapple deck and ate pineapple that night.
Weren't you awful tired of
We
seeing
got up
pineapple
early.
by then?
I don't, what's a skip box?
A skip box is a large box that it's about 5 feet square, about this deep, and we just throw the pineapples in there. You've seen oranges harvested in the fields up around Bakersfield, haven't you, on television?
No,
So
I'm
how they dump them in
city
these
boy.
big boxes and haul them out. It's just a big wooden box that we dump the pineapples in.
You've seen them on the road. I'll point one out to you the next time where I didn't realize you didn't know what you were looking
Yeah,
at.
you see trucks hauling them to
Yeah.
the juice factory.
All the time.
They're called skip boxes.
Hmm.
And we went on.
I'm not sure how your relationship developed. I mean, the last I heard was you both kind of went separate ways to high school. You never finished high school then. You couldn't have.
Did you
So-
finish it in the Navy or
Yeah.
anything?
So you got your degree there. But this relationship just carried on even though it was a separate.
Sporadic letter writing.
Okay.
I don't know if I ever told her I loved her, did I?
I guess.
Did I?
About 40 years ago.
And then it was a little bit better than a year later before I got back to Michigan. In fact, it was Christmas of 1942 when I got back to Michigan. And
And he wouldn't get married.
Was that right?
I was there for 10 days. I only had 10 days leave.
Oh, okay. Well, I wanted Helen to tell the story of, you get the notice of his death.
And tell that story.
We're not at the
Talk
Pearl
about
Harbor
something
yet.
else. Don't tell that story.
Well, I wanted to ask what you were studying at college. You're going
I
to
could be a
teach?
school teacher.
That's what I thought. Someplace I remember that in the back of my mind.
Yeah,
So how long did you go to college then?
just till Christmas. And then when I got home, I found out that he was reported missing. And it was right after Christmas that they were supposed to have the memorial service for it. Yeah. And it was the day before the memorial service when his mother got a letter wanting to know why nobody wrote. So, yeah.
And next time we'll have to have you bring over your scrapbook so we can see your obituary and I remember that you had money that was with you.
We still
On
have
the ship?
We still have it.
We'd love to see that and film that so we can get that down in history. I remembered you saying something too about the Blue Fleet and the White Fleet never came in together.
Until.
And this was partially to keep them safe, right? I mean, you got half your fleet out. That means you're not going to catch everybody.
That's right, yeah. You don't have all your ducks in on a pond at one time.
Mhm.
Until just a few days before Pearl Harbor, the attack at Pearl Harbor. The Blue Fleet that I was in, we were at sea. And we should have been at sea for another week or 10 days, I don't know what. But one night, shortly after Thanksgiving, we were firing a night battle practice. We were firing our big guns at night. They had towed a target out into a target area somewhere where no one knew where it was. And at 6 o'clock that evening, we were told to find the enemy, which was that target, large wooden target on a wooden sled out in the ocean somewhere. And we were told to find that target. And we were scored on the amount of time it took us to find the target, to open fire, and the amount of hits that we got out of a certain number of shells that we were allowed to fire at it. So at 6 o'clock that evening, the admiral in charge of the battle fleet that we were in opened the envelope. And the envelope said the target is on the west side of Maui Island. So we then had to navigate and position ourselves in the general area of where we thought the target might be, and then conduct a search. We had our destroyers running all over the ocean, you know, the fast destroyers, running all over the ocean looking for this thing.
And that's just a visual sighting is what you're looking for?
With a very antiquated radar. We began to get a little bit of radar in the fleet at that time, but of course very antiquated, and not many people had much faith in it. So we did find the target shortly before 9 o'clock that night. And we opened fire, and we fired our forward 14-inch gun turrets at the target, and on a closing position, something like that. And then after you fired your forward turret, you changed position so that your after turrets could then fire on the target. And we had completed our firing of the forward turrets, and we had scored some hits, and we were in the position of turning and changing course so that the after turrets could fire, and all of a sudden an unidentified submarine surfaced in the target area. Well, this target area is marked on our naval maps. It is a target area that's always a target area for the Navy out there. And merchant ships or nobody else goes in that area. It's a dangerous place to be. But yet now here surfaces a submarine in the target area. And definitely it wouldn't be one of your submarines. They know better than to go in there. So the destroyers tried to make contact with the submarine, and the submarine immediately crash dived and disappeared from sight. And of course then these type of reports began to go around the fleet, and the reports were made to Supreme Headquarters in Honolulu, which was Admiral Nimitz's headquarters in Honolulu.
So these were numerous sightings? I mean,
Two of them.
Two of them.
Two of them. We had 2 sightings that night. So we immediately went to a higher state of readiness. We brought up from the ammunition magazines below the first time that I had ever seen live ammunition put on the anti-aircraft and broadside guns topside. And we maintained this state of readiness all night long. And there was a lot of discussions. A big meeting was held in the wardroom by the officers. And the officers came back to the gun stations and said that there's something unusual going on. We're not being told much about it. We have a feeling that the submarine sightings that we had could be offensive in nature, and we were going to stay in the state of readiness all night long. And we were told to bring ammunition up on the gun mounts and have it readily available. And if any more of those type of sightings were made, we might even open fire. Well, this was quite an enlightening thing to me, you know, a young kid who had never participated in anything like this before. You know, all of a sudden here we're told that we're liable to shoot that gun at a submarine out there. Whose submarine is it? And so then the next morning, around 9 o'clock the next morning, over the horizon comes the biggest bunch of cruisers and destroyers I'd ever seen. Overnight they'd sent all these ships out of Pearl Harbor from the White Fleet, all of these cruisers and destroyers to come out and surround us, to help protect us, and to search the area. And we made no more contacts. Our sonar equipment was pretty antiquated stuff too. And we made no more contacts. We had no more surfacing of unidentified objects in the ocean that night. And by noon that next day, we were informed that we were going to go into Pearl Harbor. So that afternoon and evening, all of these ships, one by one, just followed on in and went into Pearl Harbor. And we tied up two and three abreast, 2 and 3 ships side by side in there because of the lack of sufficient berthing space for all these ships.
But you still had enough supplies, you could have stayed out?
Oh,
Is
sure.
that right?
Oh, sure.
Did anybody remark about the fact that this
Well,
was
we
highly
wondered
unusual?
why, we wondered, of course, we wondered why we were going in early because we knew we should have stayed at sea another 8 or 10 days.
Hmm.
But we went in and we tied up in there and some of us wondered why all these ships were in there. And of course, there we all sat then that morning of December the 7th. We were at a very relaxed state of readiness. When you go in port, you open up your compartments, you open up hatches and things that you normally have closed when you're at sea. When you're at sea, you're at a pretty tight state of watertight integrity. You don't like to have your ship unbuttoned to the sea. And you're buttoned up pretty tight. When you go in port, you open these all up.
What,
And
just so people have access?
You're at a relaxed state of readiness.
Hmm.
And this is the sort of situation we found ourselves in that morning of December the 7th. We had no ammunition up. We didn't have any guns manned. It was a Sunday morning. We were asleep. Only those required to be up and be on watch were up and about. It was my intentions to get up around 9 o'clock or so that morning and have a leisure breakfast. And I helped the Lutheran chaplain on the ship with church services, and it was my intentions to help him with the church services that morning. And so probably 50–60% of the crew was asleep at the time when the Japanese first started the attack on the fleet there that Sunday morning.
What's the first thing you remember hearing? I mean, did you...
First thing that happened was a torpedo hit us, even before the word was passed over the public address system.
Oh.
One of the Japanese planes had leveled off across the bay at Pearl Harbor and had launched a torpedo and hit us with a torpedo. And the torpedo hitting and blowing up on a big 56,000-ton battleship, you know, is kind of like maybe you forgetting to shift gears or let your foot pedal slip off the car and you hit the side of your house, or you'd get a thump from it and you'd hear the noise and so forth, but it wouldn't knock your house over, you know. And that's kind of what that first torpedo did. It hit us, it shook us a little bit when it exploded, and you heard a little bit of the noise, but not much. But what it did, it opened up a lot of interior compartments and a lot of seams and began flooding.
Did you know right away what it was?
It woke me up.
Mm-hmm.
When that torpedo hit us, it woke me up. I was sleeping on a cot down below decks in the lower handling room of the turret. It woke me up. And the first thing I felt was that another ship had tied up alongside us. I had experienced similar situation like that when a tug pushed a battleship alongside too hard, you know, and bumped us a little more. He didn't back down in time and bumped us a little more. And that's the first thought that came to my mind, is another ship was tying up alongside of us and just bumped us a little hard. But then right after that, we got another torpedo, and at about the same time, they began to pass the word over the public address system that we were being attacked by Japanese planes. We should go to our battle stations.
Now, when you say they passed the word, you'd have the horns blowing and the full alarm. Is that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's standard, right?
Right.
So you had to. I assume you didn't have time to change into your uniform or anything. You put your hat on and run upstairs. Is that what you do?
Well, my battle station was below deck in the ammunition magazine. You slept very close to your battle station.
Oh.
So my clothes were folded up and under the head of my cot. It was just a matter of pulling my dungarees on and a shirt and going right into my battle station. That was the sort of thing they did pretty much around the guns, was your berthing space was assigned as close as possible to your battle station,
Makes sense.
so that you had a matter of 15–20 seconds. You could be at your battle station, and you could have your whole gun crew at their respective stations in half a minute.
Well, if you were shooting 14-inch shells, what do you shoot at? I mean, isn't that too big to try to get at a plane?
14-inch shell is for a surface ship. We had anti-aircraft guns on the ship that fired at the planes. We did not fire the big guns at the planes.
So what do you do? I mean, you were the big gunman, right?
Yeah, we just sat there and waited.
wait for a ship to come into harbor with a rising sun.
One thing that did go on, shortly after we got hit with the torpedoes, we began to flood. And we flooded and not only ammunition spaces, but we flooded engineering spaces. So in a very short period of time, I would say within 8 to 10 minutes, we lost power. We flooded our engineering spaces and we lost power. And the electricity went out, and it was necessary for us to find some other means of getting ammunition topside to the guns.
Our battery's running
We're
out.
gonna lose battery power.
Can we hook up the rest of the unit or something like that?
It's easy to bring down. Hookup's just as simple.
Quarter to 9,
Time to go.
pretty quick.
Yeah, you got a half-hour drive anyway. Well, we'll pick this up later.
But I'm finding out things I've never heard
Yeah,
before.
me too. Every time he
Yeah.
tells a story, I hear something new. I get more, and that.
I guess you better stop. We came in, we were trying.
Well, you'll forgive me.
Trying to find where we were.
It's
Yes.
fine, I can run, I got
the whole
it.
Okay. Yeah, get with it.
All right.
They have, I
Sounds
guess,
that time.
quarter in on the 10th or something like that, so they're having a lot of tests.
It's
We had a letter from Tommy Wisniewski yesterday.
Oh,
He always writes cute letters too.
What's
He
your
was
instructions?
busy
They-
studying
yeah,
for it,
Oh, yeah?
for
When
tests.
everything else failed?
That's right, yeah, the instructions.
Yeah.
No, I,
Doing all right. But he would, though. He's always been real good in school.
You know, once you learn the basics about studying.
All right.
Addressing out of the fleet here.
Okay.
White and blue, huh?
Give me that right shoulder, Ray. Let me see that patch. No, the patch.
The
He's
back,
got a patch.
Your other right.
right.
Well, wait a minute, what does that say?
the back is the Pearl Harbor side.
It says
Yeah, I got the back.
Scory Smith? Is that what that says?
Talks about some of those people.
Scobie Smith.
Scobie,
McCullough,
Smith,
Jarvis.
McCullough,
Oh,
Jarvis.
yes, okay. Now that sounds familiar, yes.
There we got the whole effect here.
Still, that's a pretty patch, isn't it? Rock survivors.
That's what
There you go. Pearl Harbor Survivors, Chapter 12, San Fernando Valley, with a mission on it.
Mission on it. And this one is,
The
Yeah.
Apollo.
no,
Not Apollo?
the space shuttle.
That's not part of the Apollo program. That's a
Apollo
different
went to
thing.
the moon.
That's
Apollo went
right.
to the moon program.
This is when you went down to
This is
the...
the space shuttle that blew up off the Cape with all those names on it.
Oh, that's right, Scobie.
Yeah. Big Scobie.
You were down though for...
Onazuki.
You and Helen were there for one of the
I
launches, weren't you?
I think the second one that they launched, we were in Florida. We weren't right at the Cape. We were about, I guess maybe 60, 80 miles away by the way the crow flies. And I guess the talking we won't finish tonight anyway.
Who? Who?
Well, this is October the 27th,
I think so.
and we've invited Ray and Helen back to talk some more about, to continue their experiences. And they brought a guest, and we're glad to have you.
Well, thank you.
Well, tell us your name.
Ethel Hagen-Lund.
I figured that.
From South what?
What?
From South what? South Dakota.
Oh,
South
I thought it was
Dakota.
South California.
All right. Well, you've been a member at Trinity Lutheran Church for a long, long time.
oh, wow.
Oh, you remember there before I ever went, I'm sure.
Well, let's see, I moved in down here in 62.
That's just about the time Kathy started going to church there.
That's right, that was not long.
I, of course, had been there for years and years before that.
Back in the olden days.
That's right. So we're glad you're here. I'm glad you came.
Well, thank you.
They
asked
You look just the same.
Your punishment for coming, you'll have to have lots of chocolate stuff.
Oh.
That we, and in fact, you can have anything that Ray will leave.
You can have all the milk, right, Ray?
All the non-fat.
No, he doesn't, I think he doesn't like milk at all.
He doesn't want milk any shade at all.
Ice cream? Yeah.
Another story.
In fact, he was trying to get Ethel and me to go over and find some ice cream after we ate all that food tonight.
Well, we'll have ice cream tonight for him.
He didn't need it. No, that's for sure. He didn't need it.
Well, I think when we cut this off, we were talking about the fact that you had taken a torpedo, at least one. Was it more than one? You'd taken at least one,
We had also taken a second one.
a second one. And the
It
ship
was,
had...
It was at that time that we lost electrical power.
Mhm.
We had damage and flooding in the engineering spaces.
It is better lighted over there,
Yeah,
Ray,
I
just a
think you
little
can see
bit.
it better, honey, over there. There.
And we had lost electrical power.
Not a bit.
Oh, no, no.
And that was a real enlightening experience to me because we were down below the water line and we were dogged down in ammunition compartments. And those compartments don't have any windows. So talk about black and dark. I probably experienced total darkness.
Mhm.
It was dark. Even your teeth didn't show up. People smiled, you didn't see their teeth. And
What do you mean when you say you were dogged down?
dogged down, we have watertight doors called hatches to seal up the compartments. And these hatches have rubber gaskets all the way around them, similar to a rubber seal on a quart jar that women are familiar with for canning fruits.
Mhm.
Well, they have a large gasket around that door, and then all the way around the door on the outside they have mechanical locking devices that we call dogs. And you pull these things down against this door and this rubber gasket, and you pull that door down tight so that water is not able to penetrate that opening. So we say we're dogged down in a compartment. We're sealed up. Watertight integrity is absolute.
And do you do that when you were called to general quarters?
We do that when we go to general quarters. We button up the ship so that you somewhat control the amount of spaces that can be flooded if you're hit with a torpedo or bombs or so forth. And you also contain fire and so forth to the immediate area where you are hit by the explosive device. So it's a very tight state of readiness as far as watertight integrity is concerned. You get all your people to their battle stations and then you dog all these doors down tight. And you're in there, and there you stay until the battle conditions are over. And they secure from general quarters. Then you begin to undog these compartments and go to a little more relaxed state of readiness. I had left my turret area and went to this 5-inch magazine area with the crew to help pass ammunition topside. We naturally could not fire the large 14-inch guns in port. They are a surface-to-surface type of weapon. And in that there were no Japanese ships nearby to fire at it, we had no need to fire the large weapons. So they took all of us from those areas and put us in an ammunition passage train to get 5-inch anti-aircraft ammunition past topside. Well, this ammunition came inside of large aluminum tubes. We called them ammunition containers. They were large aluminum tubes. And the projectile and powder charge was inside of this aluminum tube. They weighed probably around 85 pounds. So we were in the process of passing this stuff topside. And then we were hit by the third torpedo. And this was in an area that caused flooding in the general area where we were at. And it was necessary for us to close down some of the hatches that we had opened to pass ammunition through, because we were beginning to take too much water. And it was at that time that when we dogged ourselves down in there with the lights out that I referred to when I said I experienced total darkness. And, you also experienced some water on the deck. First, you know, there was a little water on the deck, and then it was ankle deep. And then we began to get water through the ventilation system. from other compartments. It began to seek its way through to find an exit, you know, and we began to get water through the ventilation system. And first it was a trickle, and then it was a little stream, and then it became a flow. And you wondered how much of that water you wanted to come in. You know, as it began to get calf deep in the compartment, you begin to think, what are we going to do about this? Well, fortunately, we had telephone, what we call sound-powered telephone communications, to the damage control party topside. And they knew that we were down there, and they knew we were alive, and we informed them that we were taking water in the compartment.
Now, is that up on the bridge? Is that where
No,
damage control is?
it's at a what's called a damage control station somewhere topside above the water line. In strategic locations, they're located throughout the ship, and this is their battle station. These men are trained to fight fires, fight flooding, rescue operations, and things like this. That's the significance of damage control. So they told us that they could shut a valve in the ventilation system upstream of where we were getting this water from somewhere, and perhaps cut off the flow of water, but it also cut off our supply of oxygen. And so they left it up to us when we felt we wanted to cut the water off, and when we felt our supply of oxygen was in the compartment. The compartment that we were in was probably about the size of this room. However, it was full from the deck clear to the overhead with ammunition containers.
About how many men would you say were with you?
There was 5 of us down there
In total darkness.
in total darkness.
And you were just supposed to sit and wait? I mean, you were supposed to specifically not try to get out, you're supposed to leave
Well,
the
you knew
doors
there was
closed
no way
and
out, so
everything.
you didn't know what the damage was, and you didn't know where the flooded compartments were.
Mhm.
Only the damage control people topside knew. And of course, they knew that there was no easy way for us to get out. And they informed us that they were going to have to isolate some damage. And they do this by sticking mattresses and timbers and rubber balloons that they blow up and force in damage areas with big timbers, and then inflate these big rubber balloons to seal up the damage area. And then they've got to put what they call fire and bilge pumps in place and pump the water out of that compartment before they can advance to the next one to work toward you. So after I would say probably after a half hour, 45 minutes, we decided that maybe we wanted to cut back on the amount of water coming in the compartment. And we asked them to go ahead and try shutting off the valve in the air supply line and see if they could isolate the water, which they were able to do. And so then they said they would leave it up to us whether we wanted to leave it off permanently or whether we wanted to open it once in a while and get a shot of fresh air. I remember we tried it once. I remember we tried it more than once. We said that we would take a little water and take a little air, but when they opened that thing up, we took a lot of water. It was backed up. And
Now, you had an exit, I mean, you did get air in there.
we got some air, but we didn't call for any more after that. We didn't like that water because the water level in there went from about calf deep above the knee, you know. And we were even opening ammunition containers, taking the lids off of ammunition containers.
Let them fill up with water.
Let them fill up with water.
Good idea.
To hold the water level down.
Sure.
You not only pray, but you think of a lot of ways to get rid of water, you know. I guess maybe you could even take your shirt off and soak it in the water, wring it out, and maybe get rid of a little of it.
Do you remember about where you were on the ship, and were you fore or after?
Midships.
Midship.
Midships. Midships, port side.
And that was the side that was on the
side
on the
that-
port also, is that
That was
right?
it. It was the side toward the harbor,
Oh, toward the harbor.
where the planes
Yeah.
came in and launched their
Yeah.
torpedoes.
Oh.
It wasn't towards the shore side.
That's not, you shouldn't have been there. That was a bad place to be, didn't you know that?
Lord wanted me.
Well, now your normal position was forward. You were on the big guns forward.
I was in turret 2, which was not really forward. It was more midships. Midships forward, yeah.
Well, now, were you in the compartment now that fed the 14-inch gun, or were you?
No, I
not-
had left there and gone into this 5-inch ammunition
Right.
storage area,
Okay.
which was maybe 15, 20 feet away.
Oh, so it wasn't a long way back. I think you've said that you were on the California. We established that.
Good old battleship California, the pride of the pineapple fleet. Prune Barge, they call us the Prune Barge. We called ourselves the pride of the pineapple fleet.
All right.
After we got out to Hawaii, we called ourselves the pride of the pineapple fleet.
Now, were you lined up next to another battleship?
No, we were by ourselves.
You were.
The battleships behind us were tied up 2 abreast. But we had the Admiral on board, so the Admiral had the prerogative of where these other ships would go.
And you didn't go next to
He
him.
didn't come next to us.
You didn't go out to Pearl Harbor and
Yeah.
take the tour. They
Yeah,
didn't-
we took it with you.
Yeah.
That's right.
Didn't Ray show you the place where they were tied up?
I think he didn't remember
Yeah.
whether
It
he was
one or two.
one that was double or whether the California was by itself.
No, I knew that, but the
He
camera
wanted to get it on
didn't.
tape.
Oh.
I just was curious if you had seen the area.
Yes.
We've been out there so many times that I don't know if everybody has seen the place where the California was tied up at that time. That's why I was asking.
In fact, when we were on the launch, the young man in charge pointed out that Ray had been on the California. And it so happened that most of the people on our launch were Japanese tourists.
Yeah.
And they were standing up taking Ray's pictures. You remember that? He was a big celebrity.
The granddaughters and grandsons of my enemies.
That's right. Well, get us out of this hole. You were down at, well, it's not
So
a hold, it's an
this all
ammunition.
happened, the attack started at 5 minutes of 8 that Sunday morning. And it was probably somewhere in around 11:30. First they told us they were making headway. And probably within 30 to 45 minutes they'd get us out. Well, 35 to 40 minutes, or 45 minutes is not very long under conditions like that. And that they were working, and
But long from your point of view, I'm sure.
that didn't come about. So it turned out to be about 11:30, as near as I can remember that morning.
And the attack started at 7, is that right?
5 minutes of 8.
5 minutes to 8.
And they kept us informed. They were giving us a running report of what they were doing and what compartment they were at now and so forth. And the next thing you know, there was a knock on the other side of the hatch of the compartment that we were in. So that was a welcome sign. And still, we weren't ready, at least in my own mind. I wasn't quite ready, ye of little faith. I wasn't quite ready to undog that hatch because I knew there hadn't been water on the other side. And I remember we even rapped on the door with a piece of metal pipe and got a repeat from the other side before we were ready to undog the hatch and see that we now had an escape route up the trunk and out the top side. So it was at that time then that I first saw the damaged top side. I got out on deck. I saw the battleship Oklahoma rolled up. She was bottom up in the channel. I saw the Maryland and the West Virginia burning, and I saw the Arizona burning. The Arizona had already blown up at the time that we got out. She had blown up and going to the bottom, but she was still burning. And I saw oil on the water. Most of the harbor by that time had been covered with oil when this oil was burning and creating quite a little smoke. So we were only out on deck maybe 10 or 15 minutes when they passed the word that they wanted all unnecessary personnel that weren't involved with firefighting and and control of flooding to leave the ship. They didn't know whether we were going to have additional explosions internally from the fires or what, so
The air attack was now over.
the air attack was over. So I was one of many then that abandoned ship. We slid down the lines over to those quays that we were tied up to, and then from there we jumped in the water, and I don't know, I don't think we had very far to swim to where we were bottomed out. We were able to walk ashore over on Fort Island from that point. And it was at that time that I realized that I was hungry. I hadn't had any breakfast, and it was noon. And I had a buddy over on Fort Island, the Naval Air Station over at Fort Island, that went through training with me in Great Lakes in 1939 and 40. And we used to visit one another once in a while out there. And I always remember when I went over to visit him and went to their mess hall, they had the best food. So this crossed my mind, and where we abandoned ship there and went over, we weren't too far from this mess hall. And I thought, well, I don't know what's going to be going on here this afternoon, but maybe I'd take a chance to go over and see if there's some food over there. Well, by the time I got to the mess hall and walked in the doors, this now had become a dispensary, a sick bay for wounded and burned people and stuff like that. And a large number of nurses and hospital corpsmen and so forth. Most of the hospital corpsmen off of our ship went over there, and we were evacuating our wounded over to that area.
Could you hold that light
So
a little
there
closer
was
to them?
there was no lunch over
Hold
there.
that far into the bar.
So then they decided that they asked if some of us were gunner's mates, and they decided we were going to set up some machine gun nests around this Fort Island. So I got involved with setting up a couple, 3 machine gun nests, which maybe took an hour and a half, something like that.
And those are on top of buildings, or you try to?
We went over right alongside the waterfront, right along the waterfront. We began to fill some sandbags, and they were curious, you know, as to whether or not maybe the Japanese were going to follow up with some amphibious landings, invasion of soldiers and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got involved with that for an hour and a half or 2. And then they decided we were going to go back aboard ship. And we were going to go back down below decks and see if we couldn't find some more ammunition storages that hadn't flooded, and we were going to try and get some more ammunition topside to our guns. They figured that maybe bigger things were yet to happen in days to come. So we went back aboard ship, and we went back down below decks, and we found ammunition storage compartments that still hadn't flooded. And for all of that afternoon and all of that night, we passed ammunition topside by hand. We also got into some compartments that had some apples and fresh fruit and things like that. Near as I can remember, we didn't get anything to eat until the next day. Something prepared, you know. They finally got in a position where they could cook some soup and make some sandwiches.
Didn't you get with Frank? Wasn't he with you too?
My Uncle Frank was on the same ship, and he was in the general area where the bomb exploded, the one big bomb that we took, where that bomb exploded. And he was on the deck right above where the bomb exploded. So his ankles and feet were badly damaged. He had a lot of crushed bones in his ankles and feet. And he was burned, flash burned from the bomb when it exploded. And he was evacuated off the ship. He was put in a blanket and lowered over the side and put into one of our motor launches. And instead of being taken over to Fort Island, he was taken across the channel over to the Navy landing site. He ended up in the Naval Hospital over on the other side of the channel. I didn't find him for 3 or 4 days after that. One of the officers on the ship told me that they saw him go over the side, and that he was alive, but he was wounded. And it was 3 or 4 days before I went over and found him and made contact with him.
Well, Helen, now you got notified that the California was hit, or at least you heard about that. And
Was that via news? I mean, just
Yeah,
the broadcast?
well, that Sunday morning, I was at college, like I said, at Kalamazoo. And I was staying with a family, and I helped the lady make the meals and did a little bit of cleaning for my room and board. And that Sunday morning, they were selling newspapers, shouting, the Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and then we got the paper and it was in there. But it wasn't until I got home for Christmas vacation, which was maybe about the second week or so. It was before the holiday. I mean, it wasn't right at Christmas time. It was maybe a week before Christmas that I got home for vacation. And then I found out that he was reported missing. And it was the whole time during the holidays that when I talked to his mother that she hadn't heard it. She had gotten a telegram saying that he was reported missing in action. And then she planned a memorial service for him, I think about the 27th of December. And the day before, he had written a letter, and she had gotten it on the 26th, right after Christmas, saying that wanted to know why nobody had written.
Something like that, you think at least they'd somebody, right?
Yeah, right.
So of course, then she didn't have the memorial service.
Oh, it must have been so exciting.
Girl.
Can you imagine after all that?
Have a son come back to life.
Yeah.
That's
And to go along with that, her comments, my uncle sailed out of Pearl Harbor around the 18th or 20th of December on a hospital ship back to Oakland, to the Naval Hospital. And I had made an appointment to meet him on the pier that morning when they were going to load him out. He asked me to bring him a couple of boxes of Hershey candy bars and a carton of cigarettes, because he figured it was probably going to get kind of hungry on that ship coming back with all the wounded that they would have to take care of. So he ended up in the Naval Hospital in Oakland, and his wife, who lived down in San Pedro, went up to see him. She had been informed of the date of his arrival up there. So when she went in to see him, she had also been informed from Michigan that I was missing in action. So when she went in to see him, she didn't want to mention it to him right away. She figured he was in bad enough shape and he had enough worries that she wasn't going to say anything right away. So for the first 2 or 3 days that she went to see him, they didn't talk about me. And finally, one evening, I guess, after she went back to the hotel, she got to thinking, well, I'm going to have to tell Frank someday, so maybe tomorrow I'll mention to him. So the next day when she went in, after being there a while, she said to him, she said, that was too bad about Ray, wasn't it? And he said, well, what was that? And she said, well, about him being missing in action. And he said, well, when did this happen? Did the Japanese come back and attack again? And she said, no, this was December the 7th. And he said, well, he was on the pier the day I left Pearl Harbor to come back to the States here. And they talked a little bit. And he said, well, you better get out of here and go out and send them a telegram. Our folks didn't have any telephones or anything like that for telephone communication. So she quick went out and sent a telegram. And it was about the same time that Helen mentioned that my mother got the first letter from me then.
Oh, boy.
how come you folks don't write?
Yeah, it was a hectic time.
Well, we ended up, we fought the ship all that night and part of the next day. We had a lot of water coming in from the 3 torpedoes that we caught. We finally got our fires put out.
Now you said a bomb. Was that
Bomb.
Was that besides the 3 torpedoes?
Yes.
You took something through the deck from the air.
From the air.
Oh. And that was midships. You said that
About
was.
midships. And it penetrated 3 decks before it blew. It was an armor-piercing bomb. They were so designed so that they would get well within the ship before they exploded, so they could do maximum damage.
Mhm.
So we even put out extra large cables the ship was taking water and listing to port quite badly. And we were pumping water as fast as we could pump with everything that we had. We had tugs alongside providing us with electrical power so that we could run the big water pumps. But we were taking water faster than we could overcome, and we were listing more and more. So they thought we would put these big 2-inch diameter steel cables, braided cables. You can imagine how strong a braided steel cable 2 inches diameter would be. We strung those cables around our big turrets and then over to the dock. And we put several lengths of those cables out, both forward and aft, to attempt to hold the ship upright. And by 6 the next morning, we began to part some of those strands in those cables.
Oh my gosh.
And they had gotten so taut and pulled so tight. We even had one fellow almost had his leg cut off when one of those strands snapped and went whipping across the deck. And it got to the point where we knew where they were coming because the cable began to sing just before it would break. And so it became quite apparent that we were not going to hold our own. And due to our location in the channel, they were concerned that if we rolled over, our superstructure going out into the channel would tend to block the deepest part of the channel for the ships that had to enter and exit. So it was decided around 8 o'clock the next morning that we would counter-flood the compartments on the other side and take water on the other side and even her up and set her on the bottom. It was at that time, in the morning, somewhere in mid-morning on the 8th of December, that we set her on the bottom.
Was that your total focus, or were you thinking, we're gonna raise this ship later on, and did you make some preparations then while you could still?
I certainly had no thoughts along that line because I was very inexperienced, very young and inexperienced about anything like that. I'm sure some of the officers on the ship felt that the thing to do is to keep it upright, and you'd lessen the amount of damage, and you would make it much easier to raise the ship at some later date and to get it back into operation.
Had they taken the ships that were able to move and moved them out of the harbor, I mean, as soon as possible, so they wouldn't
Most
be?
of them all went to sea.
Well, now,
There were some that were in there for repairs and things like that. They kind of had to finish the repairs that were going on and get them seaworthy. But everything that could sail left. Some of them left during the attack, and the rest of them left right after the attack. Of course, they had one thing in mind. Their thought was to go out and intercept the Japanese fleet. They felt if the Japanese fleet had intentions of coming again for subsequent attacks or even bringing troop ships in, to land troop ships, and bring troops ashore, like they wanted our fleet out there to intercept. They had a general idea from the direction of the planes came. They still did not, our spotter planes that were out still had not intercepted the Japanese fleet. They still didn't know for sure where the Japanese fleet was.
I don't understand how that would happen. Wouldn't the Japanese planes have to go back to their ships, and couldn't they follow them to their ships?
We had no planes that could get off the ground. They shot them all up on the ground. We had just a few planes that got airborne, and the rest of them, our pilots were all asleep. The planes were all tied down on the ground.
Go behind them.
So there wasn't much left. You see, in addition to bringing in torpedo planes and bomber planes, one of the first sorties of planes that came in was fighter planes with machine guns. It was their intention to shoot up all the planes on the runway so that they couldn't get airborne. That was a very important thing for them to do.
Do you know if the story I've heard is true, that they had moved the planes that were normally stationed around the airfield? They were concerned about sniper attacks or something, that they moved the planes together.
I had no knowledge of that. I have no knowledge of it.
I think that's coming from movies like Tora,
Probably,
you know,
yeah.
where you don't know whether they're just making something up or
To
whether.
start with, we didn't have that many planes out there. You know, it was peacetime, and after all, who believed in the airplane anyway at that time?
I read about a guy named Billy Mitchell.
And still, they didn't believe too much in Billy Mitchell until December the 7th.
Yeah.
You know, who could sink a battleship? So, the planes that we had there were pretty old. Many of them were seaplanes. Even the B-17, which became the bomber of World War II, the B-17s had not arrived in Hawaii yet by December 7th. They came in, the first contingent of planes assigned to Pearl Harbor, B-17s, flew in 2 or 3 days after December the 7th. Up until that time, we had some old antiquated bombers, and a lot of the planes that were out there were outfitted with cameras instead of machine guns, because after all, we weren't at war. When they were out on maneuvers and out on operations and simulating attacks on our ships, what they were doing was taking pictures. They were scored by the type of pictures they took, where the cross sights were set on the ship as they made the run. That's the way they got scored for their efficiency marking.
What was your mental set in the weeks beforehand? I mean, I was under the impression that our shipping lanes and so forth were being pretty much beat up on by the Axis powers at that before we even 41.
A little bit in the Atlantic, but not in the Pacific. A little bit in the Atlantic, because we were beginning to run convoys for the British when the German U-boats were beginning to have their field day out there in the Atlantic. But there were no enemy operations of any sort going on in the Pacific. The Japanese were busy, in Indonesia and China. They had invaded China and Indonesia prior to 1941. And
that was pretty well settled by
the
that time.
Japanese were short of raw materials for their war effort. They needed oil, they needed rubber, they needed hemp, they needed foodstuffs. Their little island farms weren't producing enough for their population, in addition to feeding the armies that now were on the mainland of China and Indonesia. And so they were in dire need of raw materials. So this is what caused them to move out. And I feel that if the Japanese had stayed away from Pearl Harbor, we probably would not have really gotten involved with much. Maybe if they'd have gone into Indonesia and Borneo and those sort of places, maybe even the Philippines. Maybe we wouldn't have done anything if they went into the Philippines. And but when they began to come out and move into Midway and Guam and Pearl Harbor, then the sleeping giant back here on the mainland of the United States said, no, that's enough. And other than that, I've always felt that maybe we would let them get away with it and let them have their raw materials.
From what I read, they wanted to take over.
Take over what?
Much more territory than they had.
They needed raw materials and more farming land. Yeah.
What we were rich in, yeah.
They also wanted to have be a leading power with more territory.
Hitler promised them this.
So they
Hitler
were,
told Hirohito, you get into the war with the United States and keep the United States busy so that they don't get involved with us in Europe. And when we win everything, we'll help you and we'll give you,
they would like to have the United States.
Yeah.
Because those books, some of those books, I don't know if you've read any of them, during that period of time that people wrote. And that's what they wanted. They thought that they were strong enough to take over.
I don't know what you mean by the books. I've read a lot of books.
About the Pearl Harbor and before and right after the war. I don't know right off the different names of them right now because I've read quite a few, but there are some that are real detailed.
I don't guess I have. I've read mostly things about the war. Do you think you could use some chocolate cake and ice cream and stuff?
Boy, after going all night and all day fighting those battles with nothing to eat, I'd sure join Rick in a kitchen in a hurry.
Oh, I thought you weren't gonna feed us, huh? I thought you were, that's why
I
you...
just told Mike it was hard to hear. I thought we'd take a break in a few minutes.
Oh, I just whetted their appetite, telling them all about it.
When
What'd
you
you
were in
tell him?
California, you guys weren't engaged or anything, were you? You were just friends.
No.
Friends,
He's
yeah.
ready, he's ready to.
Road tour once in a while.
Yeah. Except right after the attack and to let her know she was okay.
They didn't give us much time to write letters after that. We were working on removing anti-aircraft guns from the ships that were now sitting on the bottom, to take them over and set them up on land for anti-aircraft defense of the islands.
Were these above the water? I mean, you were walking on the deck, the
Some of them were above the water, some of them were 2-3 foot underwater. But, we were able to get down and get the hold down bolts off and cranes alongside lifting them off.
Mhm.
And we set these guns up all around the
Yeah.
island of Oahu at various locations. And
anticipating another attack.
They thought they were gonna come back. Have you ever been aboard a battleship like the California or any of those?
Oh, we were on the Missouri.
Missouri.
yeah, up in Washington, yeah,
Oh, because
tremendous.
Mobile, Alabama has a battleship that you can go through. It's just
The USS Alabama,
But I mean, it's there and has everything on it, and you could just
state
take
of
it.
Alabama.
You could
Sent it.
just go through it and all below deck and everything. And I'd seen the top side in a couple decks down, but never down below. And you could go through the whole thing. And it's very interesting. If you ever get up that way.
I don't think we saw that much on the Missouri. They had a lot of that cordoned off.
You
And
can't go below deck.
yeah, yeah.
Well, there in Mobile, they have the USS Alabama open to the public, and they run guided tours down into the innards of the ship.
Yeah, you can go all the way. And then there are other things out there too, planes and submarines.
Planes and submarine.
And it's a whole complex of different kinds of things that are interesting to see.
Would be interesting.
Yeah, I'd like that.
When we went to Florida a couple of years ago, we stopped there. It's very near the freeway, isn't it? And it was very interesting, because like I say, I've been on the California different ships, but never really below where they lived, where the men lived, in the quarters down below. And that's, you can go all the way.
Hmm.
So it's interesting.
When after the attack, how did you find out what you were supposed to do? Or did you just go around and see where you could help, or did they have some kind of
we had officers and senior enlisted personnel who then received instructions from higher authority as to what we were going to do and what our purpose was for any given day, what sort of operation we were going to be involved with.
So you must have been in a huge barracks of some sort, or sleeping
No
on the
barracks.
ground or
We
something.
slept on the ground and on the deck. No sleeping bags.
You slept on the ship, on the boat.
We each had a pair of dungarees and a hat and a pair of shoes. That's all you needed. And we slept on the decks at night, briefly, because we stood gun watches at night too. We'd be 4 hours on and 4 hours off. During the daytime, we worked getting ammunition out of the ship, taking guns off the ship, getting foodstuffs out, things of that nature. And then when we got the guns off, the Navy Yard people assisted us over there with their large cranes. We took these, while we were taking the guns off, construction people were out in the boondocks someplace, out in the brush and the shrubs and stuff around Pearl Harbor, which you remember seeing when we drove around. They were out there pouring concrete foundations for these guns already. Things moved that rapidly. From December 7th to about, I'd say it was probably about the second week in January, that we were ready to go out into the boonies and set these guns up. And we went out there and set them up and tied them all in. Somebody from the United States shipped temporary diesel generators, large diesel generators out to us. We set them up, we wired these guns in, had everything working electric hydraulically, And by the time we got the guns all set up and tied in and bolted down, all of a sudden one day here came 4 or 5 truckloads of Army personnel. They were reserve personnel from the United States who had been in artillery, you know, armed guards, auxiliary units. They had been in artillery training here in the States 1 day a month or something like that. Now all of a sudden they ended up on a troop ship, and 6 days later they're in Pearl Harbor. And they came out and they took over these guns that we set up. We trained them, we stayed with them for a week or so, showed them how to fire them and everything. And these Army personnel took over these guns. And by that time, divers had come out from the mainland and began to put temporary patches on these battleships that we were going to raise. And they had been diving and cutting off jagged pieces of steel. And they brought with them large, heavy gauge rubber inner tubes. When I say large, I'm talking about one large enough to seal up the whole inside of this room. And they went down below the water line and they spot welded big bolts, big diameter bolts, threaded bolts on the side of the ship at predetermined locations. And then they took these big rubber balloons, inner tubes, and they put them around, somehow they wired them around on these large studs that were welded, these bolts were welded to the side of the ship. And then they took large redwood timbers, 8x8 redwood timbers, that had been pre-drilled, the same hole pattern of these bolts that was welded on the side of the ship, and they slipped these timbers over those bolts, put nuts on, and tightened them down. So this now made that rubber inner tube a secure, watertight device on the outside of the ship. And once they got those all bolted down tight, they had a high pressure air line that went to a compressor topside and turned that compressor on and pumped up those big old inner tubes. And this now sealed the ship from the water out in the harbor, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Had it sealed up with these big inner tubes. And you had the water pressure against it on one side, and they were pulled down tight by these big timbers. So it took them the better part of 2.5 months to seal up these holes. And at the same time, there was a group of people that were putting large 24-inch diameter pipes down through hatches, down to the inside of the ship. And topside, they had great big multi-gallon pumps up there that would pump 2,400 gallons of water a minute or something like that. Tremendous pumps had been flown out from the United States. And there was a group putting these big pumps in place in various areas of the ship. So that at some given day, down here in March, the pumps were all going to be in place, the patches were all going to be in place, the dry dock was going to be empty. There wasn't going to be any ships coming back from the South Pacific damaged or anything. The dry dock was going to be empty for 24 days. The keel blocks were laid in the dry dock to fit your ship. And it was determined that we would turn those large pumps on, I think around 2:30 in the afternoon. And at 6:30 the next morning, they had determined the ship would break loose from the mud and once again become buoyant and floatable, push across the channel into the dry dock. So that afternoon, boy, they turned those big old pumps on, and that old water just shot out of there. And as the water level lowered internally in the ship, we went down and undogged other compartments to let more water break loose to flow to the area where these big pipes were. And sure enough, the next morning, I don't know what the hour was, but I don't think they missed it by much because most of us were topside. All of a sudden, she broke loose from that mud. You know, she was stuck to the bottom a little, broke loose from that mud, and that little battleship just bobbed into water like that, 55,000 tons. Bobbed into water when she broke loose from the bottom and became buoyant again. It was a funny sensation. And tugs were standing alongside of us as soon as she broke loose. We cut our lines loose from the pier, and the tugs pushed us right across the channel into the dry dock.
What date was that?
The date of 23 March 1942 comes to mind. Somewhere shortly after the middle of March of 1942. California was now once again afloat.
But how long did it take you before you went back to the States?
Well, we worked on the ship along with the Navy Yard people in making her seaworthy so that we could come back to the States with her. And then part of that time, I also went back over to the battleship West Virginia and helped do a lot of preparation work for the battleship West Virginia. I helped raise the West Virginia also. And then after that, they told us that those of us that had been out there that long and had helped raise 2 ships, we could ride the California back to Bremerton for repairs. So
Then what did they do in Pearl? They just got you seaworthy?
temporary
Okay.
patches.
Okay.
And we cleaned up and made one fire room operative.
What's a fire room? That's
Fire
where-
room is where the boilers are that make the steam to drive the steam generators to turn the turbines, which in turn turn the screws and pushes it through the water. So we cleaned up a couple fire rooms, we cleaned up one engine room, we cleaned up our turret 2, and we wanted to have a few rounds of ammunition on board going back just in case a submarine should surface or something. And somewhere around the, I'd say probably the 12th to the 15th of December of 1942, we sailed out of Pearl Harbor, headed for the mainland of the United States.
Oh, so 9 months you worked on that ship at
Yeah.
Pearl.
Yeah.
And that's after it was raised.
And there was times that we had to leave the dry dock because a carrier might come back from the South Pacific, having been banged up down there by the Japanese in the South Pacific around Guadalcanal and in that area. And when we found out that one of those carriers was coming back, she'd be back in Pearl in 3 or 4 days. We had to get out of the dry dock. They had to lay keel blocks for the carrier. And then the carrier came in and it was in 6, 8, 10 days. And she'd get patched up and taken care of, and out she'd go, and they'd relay keel blocks for the California, shove us back in there, and go back to work. We worked 24 hours a day. We had 2 12-hour shifts, along with the Navy Yard people.
They have 2 dry docks. Where was the West Virginia?
West Virginia, well, after we got patched up, we went outside the dry dock and was tied up in the pier for the rest of the work. And at that time, the dry dock was relinquished to the West Virginia.
Okay.
Once we got our below water line damage taken care of, temporary patches on while we moved outside the dry dock. So 90 of us, officers and men, was the complement for bringing the battleship back to Bremerton, Washington.
What's the normal complement?
1,600.
Whoa,
So 90 of us brought her back.
that sounds like a skeleton crew.
We did all sorts of things. We stood watch maybe on the bridge for 2 hours. Maybe we did a 2-hour watch in the fire room. And then maybe we did a 4-hour watch in the galley, getting a meal ready. And then maybe you got to sleep for 2 or 3 hours, and we went back somewhere else to another activity. You know, we stood all sorts of details for the, I think it took 7 or 8 days to come back to Bremerton.
Sounds like a no-frills cruise.
Yeah, no. And we ate a lot of soup and sandwiches. There were no fancy meals, no desserts, anything like that.
These are,
No chocolate, yeah, I know what he was thinking.
I'm still looking for chocolate tonight. And a lot of coffee and a lot of soup. And then one morning, boy, what a glorious morning it was. We pulled into the Straits of Juan de Fuca, up in the Olympic Peninsula. Helen and I were up there this last summer, looking out over the straits, and then we crossed it one day when we took the ferry across to British Columbia. I told her, I said, this is where we came in that day when we came back from Pearl Harbor.
Now, you came in with some sort of accompanying.
We had one destroyer with us that sailed out of Pearl Harbor with us for a day or two, and then another destroyer from the mainland here met us about halfway and sailed with us on the way back in.
That's all.
That's all. And we had quite a reception. They had a lot of bands and a lot of dignitaries on the pier when we came in. And it was quite a great day to come back into Bremerton again for major overhaul. And that was the time then, a few days after that, when I left on leave to go back to Michigan to see my relatives and my sweetheart.
Uh-huh.
I didn't see it.
Sir?
I didn't see it.
That's right.
There you go.
I wasn't even born yet, let alone you.
Yeah.
Well, what were you doing during all this time, Helen?
I was at school.
Now, were you married yet? When were you
No,
married?
No,
I'll let her take it.
no.
I quartered her during that 10 days that I was on leave back there.
Did you?
When he came back, he wanted to get married right during Christmas. He did go and get the ring. But I said, no, I couldn't get married and go with him in a week's time. That was just a little bit too fast for me. Plus the fact that I was working at that time, and I had to give notice. And coming from a farm and not having been far away from home, that Seattle looked like an awful long way.
Yeah. Now, what were these dates again? You were home, what was this 10-day period?
10 days.
What date?
Over Christmas,
Oh, Christmas of 40?
December
1942.
42, because he was married in
Christmas and
February
New
of
Year's.
43.
Okay.
And we were married in Seattle. And then his mother and I went to Seattle. And we were married in Seattle and moved in church there.
Your parents didn't go? Or?
Are you kidding? They didn't have money at that time to take a long train ride in December or February.
Yeah.
No way. Couldn't afford it. Too many of them at home yet, too.
Yeah.
I had 3 at home yet.
Well,
We'll have to shut down pretty soon.
it won't be long now, folks. I didn't know how old those lights were. Dad's had those around a long time.